Esto, nos vamos a enlazar con Gina Chua, ella es editora ejecutiva de la startup Semafor. La verdad es que es muy interesante lo que Semafor está haciendo. Ojalá sigan el canal de Semafor en WhatsApp. La verdad es que es muy recomendable. La información
And will
es
I be
buena.
able to see the audience or not?
Gina, ¿me escuchas? O ella se va a ir directo. Te dejamos el espacio, bienvenida, welcome. Y que corra. ¿Me escuchas, Gina? ¿O la escuchan de aquel lado? Okay.
Sorry.
Welcome, Gina. Go ahead, please.
Am I starting now? Yes. Okay. Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. Sorry I can't be with you in Miami, but for lots of reasons. Travel to Florida is off my dance card these days, and that's a very long story. And if you want to know about it, I'm happy to chat about it. But I'm here, obviously, to talk about AI and journalism. So let me start with a question. What's a better mode of transport, a horse or a car? Now, I can't see any of you, so I have no idea what you're doing right now. But if I was there, I would have said, hands up, all those who think it's cars. Hands up, all those who think it's a horse. And then hands up for all those who say, it depends, right? Because, of course, it depends. It depends on what you need or what you want to do, right? So if you want to go fast on a highway with a lot of stuff, then cars win, obviously. But if you want to go, navigate some rocky mountain trail, then horses are far better. So the point is, each is superior in its own way, in its own environment. Neither is intrinsically superior to the other as a mode of transport. And obviously, it's true that, cars dominate now and horses, things you see in movies. But that's because we decided we wanted the advantage of cars, and we changed our environment to take advantage of their speed, their ability to carry large loads, and all of that sort of thing, right? We bulldoze mountains, we built highways, we set up gas stations and traffic lights, and we created laws and traffic police and all of these nice things. We didn't just expect them to suddenly be better horses. We didn't get rid of horses and get put in cars. We changed the world to take advantage of cars. And my point is that so it is also with technology, humans, and news. So much of the discussion about using AI, or actually much more specifically large language models, which is mostly what I want to talk about here, much of the discussion about using LLMs in newsrooms has focused on how to automate our existing tasks, copy editing, headline writing, and in some incredibly ill-fated experiments, writing entire stories. Right, and we can talk about that in a little bit. And some of this makes sense, right? If you can do something faster or cheaper or better with AI, then why not? Right? At Semafor, we're using LLMs to help us proofread stories, to help us generate ideas for call to action links, and to do multilingual searches. And in all of those things, it works pretty well. But for a lot of other use cases, AI is just frankly less helpful. And there's a few reasons for it. And the main one is that machines aren't humans. Just like cars aren't horses or horses cars, using machines just to do human work is like inventing cars and trying to use them exactly the way we used to use horses. It's ineffective, it's inefficient, it's a bad way to exploit a potentially transformative technology. And instead, we need to think more about what we need to change ourselves to take full advantage of what LLMs can do for journalism. we need to look beyond our current workflows and products to try and see the real possibilities that machines can bring to the world of news. Right now, we're expending a ton of effort to make imperfect humans out of machines, when we should be thinking about how to leverage the things they do better than humans, or the things that they do that humans can't do, and marry that with what humans do better than machines, and to make what I used to call the cybernetic newsroom. And so that's what I want to talk about today, right? About the promise and the challenge of AI on news and the news business, and how we should rethink how we think about how we use it in newsrooms, and how transformative it could be, it will be, to how people access information and how we need to adapt to those changes. So I just say a full disclosure. I see a ton of dangers ahead, both for the news industry and the communities that we serve now that AI is here. But basically, I'm an enthusiast about how AI can help us reinvent what we do and how we fulfill our mission. So just understand that's my perspective. But let me start with the bad stuff. We know, of course, about the downsides of machines, of LLMs, of which there are many. We all know about hallucinations, and that's why those experiments with having LLMs generate full stories was as short-sighted as they were and ended as badly as they were. Even though, in fact, there are some ways, some fairly simple ways to minimize hallucinations, which I'll discuss in a bit, but that frankly were not used. We worry also about misinformation and deepfakes, and I worry about those too, although I worry more about the ability for an LLM to write entirely truthful statements that are very persuasive, that play right to my biases without ever lying. All they need to do is leave out key context or give me selective facts, and the ability to do that at scale. And that seems to me a much more insidious danger, and one far less susceptible to fact-checking. Although, again, as I'll discuss in a bit, there may be ways to use LLMs to counter that trend as well. There are real questions about intellectual property and fair use and how we get paid for all the public service we provide, and more practically, just how we keep the lights on. And that may be one of the toughest nuts to crack. And I'm certainly not a IP lawyer, and I know there are lawsuits out there, and so I'm skipping over that as a topic, but it is obviously a really important space that we're getting into. And then I think most importantly and most interestingly, there's the issue of how LLMs, generative AI, is going to change audiences and how they access information, what their habits are, and how that in turn will affect how we create and distribute news, where the power in this new world resides, and what that does to our business models, our relationships with communities, and frankly, our relevance. That's probably the biggest and most seismic and most unpredictable shift that we're going to see. Will readers stop reading news from news organizations because they can get an LLM generated summary of the key points and analysis? Maybe, maybe not. Will AI agents scour the web and collect facts to summarize for their owners, for you and for me? Will any two readers ever even get the same story ever again? Because the stories will be somewhat generated by AI. And frankly, whatever happens, is there anything we can do about it? And I'm really not sure, right? I mean, we all have views on the worlds that we would like to be in, but honestly, when the last seismic changes came, we had very little influence. We didn't change the way the internet affected how people interacted with information. We weren't able to really affect how social media changed the recommendation of news and habits. And both of those things upended our industry. So I think it's quite possible that we have very little impact on how the world is changing. And that, in fact, our best bet might be to think about how they will change, whether we like it or not, keep an eye on how behaviors change, try to get ahead of it, instead of what we normally do, complain about how we think people should behave, which is now now a favorite saying of mine, which is, we go to war with the audience we have, not the audience we would like to have. As a digression, I recently attended a 2-day workshop sponsored by the Open Society in Piedmont in Italy to game out possible scenarios for how the AI revolution will affect news consumption. And honestly, it was a really fascinating exercise. You try and put aside all of your preconceptions, all of your biases, and just think about how the world will change, and then think about how we should react to that. Plus, we went Piedmont in March, which is very nice. Anyway, I'm not sure yet, but I think the report is going to be made public, and I highly recommend you look at it. It's not a perfect report, but it's a good way to start thinking. I mean, all right, so all of this is a bit of crystal ball gazing, and that's a lot less useful to people trying to figure out what we're supposed to do with our newsrooms here and now, which is fair. So let's pivot and talk about what we can actually do now, or be very close to doing with LLMs, and how even those things can already be revolutionary. So the first thing to do is to recognize what LLMs are, what they do, and how they do it, right? I'm going to skip over video generators, sound generators, image generators, which are all astounding systems in their own right, because I'm mostly focused on text in news, but there's also a ton to explore in those areas. So LLMs are large language models, which is to say they handle language well. They don't actually understand language. It's a statistical model that sort of figures out what the next word is, which is very different from understanding. But they've been fed so many examples of text that they come up with a reasonable facsimile of languages that 99 or more times out of 100 makes sense. That means they can read a text and distill its meaning, even though, again, through that statistical process, it doesn't actually have any deep understanding of the world that it's describing. But they are very, very, very good, astonishingly good at this task. But they are not, and this is really, really important, they are not large fact engines. They do not have any facts in them. They have no ability to verify information embedded in them. And frankly, not even any conception of what a fact is. They're also not large calculation models. They cannot, in fact, add or subtract worth a damn. Although, as I discovered a few days ago, they're starting to improve quite a lot. But for the moment, at least until I do some more experimenting, I'm going to assume that they continue to be really, really bad at facts. So when you have an LLM, use them to handle language, keep them away from facts and calculations. So the way, when I think about all of that, the way I think of LLMs, at least right now, is that they are slightly autistic English major who knows a little bit about the world, but not a lot, can't add or subtract, but is very diligent and helpful. I call him Dylan because it's kind of a nice name. He's usually wearing a beret when I generate a picture of him. He's not the sharpest stick in the barrel, but he tries to be helpful. If you ask Dylan when Benjamin Franklin died, he'll make a guess. And he may be right, he may be wrong, but you don't want to count on Dylan not having slept through history class, which he probably did. But if you give him a biography of Benjamin Franklin and ask him to look up the date, he'll do a really good job. And the answer, by the way, is 1790, in case you didn't know. So what I've just described, putting a document in front of an LLM, is called a RAG, or Retrieval Augmented Generation System. You should basically give an LLM documents and ask it to answer based only on those documents, right? Don't ask an LLM when Benjamin Franklin died. Give it a document about the founding fathers and ask it to look for the answer there. And when you do that, the results are remarkably accurate and with very little hallucination. And that opens up all sorts of possibilities. There is a small aside before you rush up and do this. This works well when the document set is relatively small. Too many documents, give Dylan too much to read, and the quality drops, right? There are technical ways around this, but let's just park that for the moment. It can be solved, but right now, this is an important thing to know. So what can you do with this capability? It turns out you could do a ton. So I built a dozen and a half, 2 dozen rags so far. And, I just do that in my spare time. They take 20 minutes, a couple of hours. I have an OpenAI Plus account. I have a Poe account, and you can do a ton of stuff just playing, right? So one core use is to look at complicated documents with a lot of text and have it surface specific information for you. So, for example, on the side, I'm working on a project to take vetted security advice for journalists, which is a complicated, very nuanced area of expertise, if there ever was one, and generate accurate answers to specific questions. I've taken all of this guidance, I put it in a rag, and I start asking it questions. What equipment should I bring to cover the aftermath of an earthquake where there may be a risk of flooding? What signs should I look for that a protest might be turning violent? How dangerous are rubber bullets? What are the advantages and disadvantages of wearing protective equipment while covering a routine protest? And so on, right? I've built a prototype that I'm working on scaling up, and I will say it works impressively well. Does have some issues still, but they're all fixable. And most interestingly, because it's an LLM, it gives me answers in multiple languages, which opens up the possibility of giving tiny, under-resourced newsrooms around the world security advice they don't currently have access to. I've had it generate answers in Spanish, in Hindi, and Tagalog, and asked people who speak those languages to look. And basically, the translations are great. So this is a really interesting use case. And for those newsrooms, would it be better to have an actual on-staff security advisor 24/7 talk to them? Of course it would be. But there's no world where that's possible. And this is far better than what we have right now. I've used RAGs to analyze and compare documents, such as similar laws in 2 states. How does Ohio treat this issue compared to Iowa? What acts are criminalized in Nevada, but not in Alabama, say, right? And again, that works really well. I've used it to provide answers to style books, which, let's face it, no one reads. So I have a bot that can provide guidance on covering trans issues for the Trans Journalists Association, where I'm on the board. Now, you can disagree or agree with our style guide, but the bot will tell you what it says about specific issues, and you don't have to read the whole thing, right? And you could do this for any area of specialized coverage. You want to, you've got very special coverage guidelines for immigration or for, healthcare, you can build the same bot. It's not hard. You can also take what I've just described and do the reverse. You put in a document that defines something or provides some information, and you ask the bot to classify things based on that information. So, for example, I took the Department of Justice definition of a hate crime, right, which is actually really, really short, and dropped it into a RAG. Then I fed it a bunch of made-up stories and asked it to rate each one on a scale of 1 to 5, how likely that story described a hate crime and why. So in other words, I asked it to classify information. So so these are made up stories. I started with a story of a woman being beat up by a gang of guys. And, it ranked it as low probability because there's no indication that racial or other reasons were behind the attack. I changed the story so it was an Asian woman attacked by the gang. And one of the gang members says, "We don't want your kind here." So that ranked high, which makes perfect sense, right? Then I had a woman wearing a MAGA hat attacked by people seen leaving an anti-Trump rally. And that ranked, what do you think? It ranked medium. Why? Because the bot said political affiliation is not a protected class under the DOJ definition, which is pretty smart. And it tells you what Dylan can do, even if Dylan's, not the sharpest stick in the barrel. You can understand what's going on. And then finally, I put in a story about a woman who was leaving a synagogue, attacked by people, seen earlier tearing down posters of Israelis held by Hamas. And it ranked it just above medium. The reasoning was that the attack might have been prompted by anti-Jewish feeling, but there was nothing in the description of the crime itself that pointed to that definitively, right? But here's the interesting thing. The story that I wrote, that I fed into this into this rag didn't have the word Jew in it at all. The bot recognized, because Dylan's not a complete idiot, that a woman leaving a synagogue is likely Jewish, and that people tearing down posters of Israeli hostages may be prompted by anti-Jewish feelings. And that's really impressive, the sort of thing that a nuanced reading by a human could do, but at huge scale. That's another use case as a classifier, right? So I built a misinformation and misframing classifier for trans coverage so that I can feed in stories about trans issues and get a quick sense of what's in it, or more importantly, for my mental health, how bad it is before I actually read it. It's like getting Cliff Notes or a Wikipedia entry before you actually get something. And that's obviously a very, very niche use case for me, but I could, in theory, build an immigration misinformation and misframing bot and feed every political speech about immigration into it, and get a very quick sense of what the key topics, what the key talking points are, how truthful or not any individual politician is on this. And that's a really useful use case, right? It could potentially also be a very good content moderation engine as well. Imagine your news site had very specific rules about what content was permissible. And then you could take every comment, run it against that in a rag, and anything that scored easily very low, just auto-publish it. And anything that scored high, send it over to a human to check. So these are just very different use cases than what the ones we're talking about, in terms of sort of generating news stories and so on. And then I think there's one other use case, at least so far, that I've explored, which is, I think, perhaps the most interesting and maybe the most revolutionary one, which is to take stories that your organization have done on a very specific topic, turn it into a rag, and have readers come, and rather than have to wade through a whole bunch of information that they may already know, or have read before or are less interested in, get to the core parts of the news and analysis that's most useful to them, or that they're unaware of, or that they have the most interest in, right? So again, let me give you an example. And I'll step back for a second. When I was running the Asian edition of the Wall Street Journal back in the 90s in Hong Kong, we'd have US correspondents fly out and do stories for the US paper, right? And they would have a line in the story. It would be something like this: Singapore, comma, the country the size of Rhode Island. And well, I'm from Singapore. I know how big it is. You don't have to tell me that. It's a waste of space when I'm reading. It also tells me that I'm not your audience. But obviously they weren't writing for me. They were writing for people in the US, but I couldn't publish those stories to my audience in Asia because they'd think we were idiots. I mean, what would have been useful to people in my audience would have been Rhode Island, comma, a state the size of Singapore. That would have been useful. But with LLMs, we can have both kinds of stories. We can have the same story and generate it in two different directions for different audiences, and we can generate them for individual audiences, right? So I took 5 scoops that our brilliant business editor at Semafor, Liz Hoffman, wrote about a company called 777 Partners, and turned it into this sort of Q&A machine about the stories. Now, I want to explain to you the whole 777 Partners saga. It's not important, except that it's about some financial engineering that potentially involves using insurance money, which is supposed to be, put in very safe assets, to buy potentially speculative assets, including what I'm told is a terrible English Premier League soccer team, Everton. Just remember that for a second. So I asked the bot, like, what's the central allegation here? And it gave me, based on those 5 stories, a good, accurate answer, entirely based on all of that, right? And then I follow up and said, like, is this illegal? And it gave a very nuanced answer that said, it's under investigation, nothing is definite, and so on. And I asked it a bunch of questions, and it was very, very good about answering questions. And if you think about that just as a basic use case already, that's incredibly handy. Imagine that you hadn't read these 5 stories. Somebody said, you should go read Semafor's coverage of 777 Partners. You go, like, I don't want to read 5 stories in a row. Why can't I just ask it what's happening? And this will do it. But then there was a curveball that I threw in. I said, should Everton fans be worried? And this was the sort of answer it gave, which is anytime your favorite football club, soccer club is being bought by someone whose finances are under investigation, you may want to worry. Then it goes on to talk about, what are the rules about owning a football club. So think about that for a moment, right? Because the story was not written for sports fans. The evident example was more a piece of color than a core part of the story. There was no expectation that Everton fanatics are going to come to Semafor to find, to get their news fix, right? But what it shows is that the bot can surface new and different angles. It can catch me up on the latest with 777 partners without my having to read all 5 stories. It can answer specific questions I might have about the saga. And that is completely new, and at least in my prototype, completely accurate way of accessing news. Is this how people are going to come to information in the future? And if so, what are the changes that we have to make to our systems and processes to make this happen? How will it affect our business model? What will it do to reporting, to great writing? What does it do to audience engagement and development? What are the winning strategies, right? And I know that's a lot to throw out there, but I think we're only beginning to scratch the surface. I think there's a lot more that's going to change in the next few years and the coming decade. AI systems are already incredibly powerful. In fact, I'm not sure they need to get any more powerful to be able to completely upturn our world, but they will obviously and undoubtedly get more powerful. And we need to be ready. And that means we need real understanding, real engagement with the technology, real experimentation, real learning about what it can and can't do, tracking how our readers take to it and adapt to it. It means holding on to our mission and our values, but maybe not to our products and our workflow, right? We, the news industry, we mishandled, with very few exceptions, the last 2 revolutions, the internet revolution, the social media revolution. And we paid a really steep price for that. And I don't think we want to miss this one too. So thank you very much. And I would love to have a wide open discussion about this. In case you're wondering, I just finished.
Gina, can you hear us?
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I can't hear anything.
¿Me puede escuchar, Gina?
Except the
acá?
interpreter.
¿Cómo?
Lo que podemos es hacer preguntas
Thank
que
you.
se las escriban.
Okay. Gina, good to see you. This is Carlos Lauría.
Yes, I'm listening to the interpreter.
All right.
In case anyone is wondering why
Okay.
I'm just sitting here.
Thank you so much for your presentations. Fascinating, really. I'd like to ask you about if you can tell us a little bit about what Semafor is doing with AI and its Signals project. Thank you.
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, we're doing it for some really basic things to begin with. I'll come to Signals in a second. We're using it for proofreading. It's very good at proofreading. It's not perfect, but it's very good. It does not actually understand AP style, but it gets you very close to AP style. We're using it, part of it's built into the CMS we use, which is something called Sanity, to help us generate ideas for things like call to action, read on for more about this story, that kind of thing. It does a pretty good job on that. And I've been trying to build other bots for tools like that to help generate headlines, all of the straight stuff that we do there. The Signals project is interesting. What we've done is we've leveraged the multilingual capacity of LLMs and tied it into a search engine, in this case, Bing. And what we've done is basically, so Signals as a product is really kind of, some news breaks. Trump is, somebody takes a shot at Trump, and there will be a lot of news analysis, especially from around the world, and that we want to be able to summarize and put in a story. And so we'll say, this is the news, and then, here are some of the insights that come from around the world. And so that requires us to be able to search around the world in multiple languages very quickly. And you can do this by hand, right? You can run through Google Translate, you can search in Chinese, you can search in Hindi, you can search in Russian, and you can get web page, and then you get the page translated. You can ask it to be summarized, but it takes forever. So what we've done is essentially automated that system. So we can write in a single search term, Trump shot or Trump attempted assassination attempt, and specify the languages we want to look at. And so, let's say Chinese and Spanish. And then it will search for websites in those languages. They will find the most relevant stories, they will translate them, and they will summarize them and return them. And so that lets our reporters get a really quick sense of what the Chinese-speaking world is saying about this. And anything that we think is interesting, we'll click in. We obviously don't take the LLM's word for it, but we'll click in, we'll go to the site. That site will be in Chinese, and we'll get it translated, and then we can see if it's accurate. But it's a really quick way of looking at the world, and it's helped us automate our systems very well. There is one small quirk to this, which is that there are sites that will put a do not crawl on for AI-powered search engines, and so that some parts of the world are a little more closed off to us because of that. But the truth is, this is still a very, very useful tool. We know where to go to get many of the sites that have been closed off. I hope that answers the question.
No sé si hay alguna otra pregunta. Gina, I'm going to take advantage then and ask you another question. I think we discussed it last time we met in New York, and I'm interested to give that same answer here to the audience. Is your view about the agreement that OpenAI and ChatGPT are making with the media? Where do you see that going? Thank you.
That's a really, really good question, and I wish I knew the answer, right? I mean, clearly there have been some deals that have been cut with the AP, for example. I think with the Murdoch papers and so on for licensing of content, and then obviously there's more famously on the other side, there's the New York Times lawsuit, right? And a lot of this, I think, is a little bit dependent on what you think the merits of the lawsuit are, whether you think the Times will get a lot more money by suing, or whether the AP is cutting its best deal to extract what value they can while they can. I'm not a lawyer, so you should not ask me what I think about the lawsuit or the merits of it. I do think that there are two things going on that we should be aware of. And they play on both sides of it. One obviously is that if the world really does change the way I think it's going to change, which is that LLMs are going to suck up a lot of facts, and that there's going to be some system that some facts are going to be verified. Like, for example, if everything the AP says is considered to be factually truthful, they ring fence that information, they build a big RAG, and every time I want to know what's happening, it generates me an answer based on the AP's facts only. I think that's a world which is a very interesting one, and that, potentially the AP does very well out of it. Maybe it's an alliance of the AP and, whatever else, AP and Reuters and El País and, whatever, to get that information together. That's one world, but I don't believe, I have no idea how much the AP has been paid, but whatever it's been paid, it's not close to what the cost of producing it is. So I don't know what the stable long-term business model out of that is, even if that's the right way to go. And assuming the New York Times prevails in its suit, essentially saying we need to be paid a lot more, I'm still not sure how much money gets transferred over. So I think the lawsuits and the deals are just sort of the beginning, if you like, sort of negotiations and dance around what the new business model will look like, and I'm not really sure. The other thing that I think we just need to get clear in our head too, is that we constantly talk about LLMs, OpenAI, Anthropic, Llama, Meta, all of these companies needing our content, news content for training purposes. I don't think they need us for training purposes. Again, I'll come back. They are language models. Their language skills are extremely good. We have some limited ability to add to their language knowledge, in the sense that language evolves, and you want to know, and we're one of the first people to tell you how language evolves, and so you want the LLM to be good on language. But they're not, and they don't really have to train on our facts. They obviously are training on our facts, but as I've said earlier, they have no ability to distinguish a fact. So the point that they are taking all of these AP stories and potentially all of these New York Times stories, they're mixing those as much with whatever conspiracy theory site is out there on QAnon. And so I'm not sure that they are actually using the facts that we think are really valuable in the way that they think are valuable. I think in the long run, we all have to build systems like RAGS, where we can say, what happened in Iowa yesterday, but give me only information from the AP or from Reuters or from whatever news organization you trust. And I think that those are very different models. And again, I think we're conflating all of it right now, and it's not entirely clear to me how this all plays out. The only thing I know I'm pretty confident of is that people will come to news in very different ways in somewhere between the next 5 to 10 years. And that will completely change our business model. And we're not ready for that, we're in real trouble. That's not the happy message, but that's the one I believe.
No, it's not. Thank you, Gina. I'm Marta Ramos from Mexico. And I believe we've been talking to our newsrooms, and everyone is saying they're just looking around how we can start working with AI tools, but I'm really sure the young ones are already doing it. So I think we're losing also the opportunity to be on control of what's going on with AI in our newsrooms. So do you have some kind of protocol in Semafor of how to use these tools, or which ones use and which ones are not really good enough yet?
Yeah, well, we're a very small newsroom. We have 30-something people right now, and it's a very young newsroom, which is great, and it just means people play, right? And specifically, there are 2 people that spend a lot of time playing, me and a young reporter. And we've got basically OpenAI Plus accounts, $20 a month, and you can buy a group account too if you want. And I personally have a Poe account, which I don't know if you've ever seen, Poe.com, where you can test multiple different models. Both have the advantages and disadvantages. That's $20 a month too, so that's $40 a month for me to play with it. I think there's 2 different things to do here. One is you should set people who are interested, whether they're old or young, in newsrooms to play. I think they should go in, they should read, they should experiment, they should be building bots. I mean, I started building bots about 8 months ago. I discovered it was lots of fun, and it's kind of what I do on weekends, and I just throw it together. And the bots none of the bots I built are industrial strength, right? I mean, we use some of my bots in Semafor, but that's because we're a very small newsroom. There's no way it would work in a 300-person newsroom. With 30 people, you can do whatever you want. And having people experiment and play and come and say, I have this idea, I think that's a really useful thing, because it keeps the mindset of the news organization young, and it gives you a sense of possibility. The other side of it, which is like, what do you actually want to build into your toolkit? What do you want to make work? That's a more complicated exercise. Depends on how much bandwidth you have, how much bandwidth your tech team has. Again, we can do really, really small things, like a proofreading bot is very easy to do. A search engine bot is very easy to do, and happy to show you how to do some of these things if you want. And those are easy. And then after that, it gets complicated and starts to scale. And we have to start thinking about how we as an industry can play with these things more. But the main thing, frankly, is to just get people to start playing, because they'll have ideas. And if they have ideas and you're encouraging and they come to you and say, we would like to take 20 hours of engineering time to build this tool that will give us these potential things, I think there's a real opportunity there. Also, I think partnering with local universities can get you a lot done. And then there is one company, one newsroom that I would suggest that everybody make a beeline for and talk to, which is Schibsted in Scandinavia, which has built a whole suite of tools for their newsroom, everything from editing to idea generation to all of this. They've done this at real industrial scale. I haven't had an opportunity to really talk to them about how they managed to get that through. But that is a real example of how a newsroom is thinking about the future very actively and trying to learn how to use all of these tools rather than run away from them.
Thank you very much. ¿Hay alguna otra pregunta? Aprovechando que tenemos a Gina a distancia.
Okay.
There's one question, Gina. De donde quieras.
Okay.
Allá hay micrófono, mira atrás.
Hi, Gina. This is Claudia Baez from Cuestión Pública, Colombia, a small media outlet. My question
I
is
know them. They're very
yes,
good.
Yes, we knew. My question is regarding AI methodologies. Right now, we are experimenting with RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation, fine-tuning, and other ones. So what is your advice in the future of new methodologies that are upcoming in AI that we can use in our newsroom? Thank you.
And I'll just say, Question Publica has done some amazing work already. So, like, I'm very impressed. I mean, I think so. RAGs have a built-in limitation right now, which is that the size of the files cannot get too big, or it starts to hallucinate. If you give it, 50,000 files, it starts to cross-read them in not a useful way. There is a technique that is both existing and being developed and experimented on, which I have not worked on yet, something called a graph RAG, which is basically what happens is you ask a RAG a question, and it basically searches in its database first, and it finds, out of 50,000 documents, it finds the 5 documents that are most relevant, and it builds a RAG on the fly out of those 5 documents, so you can just get answers out of those. I have to find out more about how to make those things work, and I think that's a critical skill to have. So I think that's one. I think a lot of the other stuff has to do not so much, and again, I haven't experimented with these, but I think if you have as a basic a RAG that has has verified information coming out of it, I think an interesting question is how can I create a prompt to give it for it to answer to specific types of people based on their data. Would you answer this question differently to someone who is living in a rural area, or someone who's living in an urban area, or to a young person, or an old person, or a foreigner, or a local? I think sort of thinking through what your use cases are, maybe one of the most valuable things. And then I think, and Question Publica, I think, has already done this, is to talk about how you can use this for translation, which is not something that I've done a huge amount of work on. Translation, audio generation in multiple voices, in multiple accents, at multiple lengths. Give me this story. I only have 5 minutes. Give me this story in a 5-minute version. I have 30 minutes. Give me the longer version. I think there are a lot of potential use cases here. But my belief right now, again, until the technology changes again dramatically, which happens, pretty much every 20 minutes, my personal belief right now is thinking about things as RAGs, one way or the other, either as a RAG or a graph RAG, or something with a limited set of information, and then turning your imagination much more to what can you do with that? What are the use cases you can have? And I think that there will be a zillion different use cases. And then I'll just add one other thing. I said that Dylan can't add or subtract, and it's true. Dylan's terrible at adding and subtracting. I did a story about 6 months ago where I sort of pointed out that until it could add or subtract, we were missing some real potential here. 2 days ago, I started playing again with it on adding and subtracting. It did a much better job. It still has problems. It can't really build me a spreadsheet that I want. It has some errors in it. But I would encourage people to start playing with that, because once you can marry language and essentially algebra, symbolic logic together, I think you get very, very powerful tools. I have no idea what tool I would build if I had that, but I have suspicions that we could do tremendous amount of good and tremendous amounts of damage once we get to that point. So I'd encourage you to keep an eye on the computational capabilities of LLMs as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time, Gina. Muchísimas gracias. It was really a pleasure to hear you and to have you here with us today. Gracias, Gina.
Thank you very much for having me.
Por supuesto que la transformación digital no es solo para los medios y para los medios alternos de los que nos hablaba Mauricio hace rato, también para las agencias de noticias. Y vaya que nos interesa mucho, dado que todos trabajamos directamente con ellas. Me gustaría invitar aquí a Miguel Ángel Oliver, presidente de EFE.